What's up, man?
All right, bro. Welcome to another episode of the Scholarly Flow podcast. This is the first time that we've done one together where we're not actually physically in the same location. Raman has been spending the summer living that digital nomad lifestyle out in Paris.
Yep. Howdy, that's me. Had to get out of the city for a little bit.
Yeah, I'm trying to have a Paris summer, bro.
Yeah, man. I haven't met Emily yet. I haven't met Emily in Paris yet, so
Hey,
maybe
you
that'll
got two
happen
more.
before I
You
leave.
got 2 more weeks. She's there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, so yeah, today we want to talk about Jay-Z. The idea for this episode really came from the fact that you got to see the surprise exhibition at the Central Library.
Yes, and that was actually like I'm still processing everything that happened. That happened about a week and a half ago. And basically, you had texted me about the exhibition. Basically, it started Friday a week and a half ago, and I think it's gonna go until mid-August or something. It's called the Book of Hov, and essentially, like you said, it's at the Brooklyn Public Library right outside of Prospect Park, and it's a
Yep.
whole exhibit. When you walk into the library, you see the exhibit organized by different chapters, like a book. Each chapter is about one part of his life, like his early days, his more of his like commercial ventures, his specific things about the music itself. It's all organized like that with props and certain artifacts from I think a lot of them were the actual legit artifacts and then some replicas to just kind of
Yeah.
expand the story. So I went to that, not really thinking much of it. I'm thinking, okay, I need to go somewhere to get some work done anyway. Usually I go to a coffee shop, but let me go to the library. That's what libraries are meant for, right?
Yeah.
And on my way there, before I sit down and get settled in, I can check out this exhibit and, then do my work. So that's what I did. Went, checked it out, saw some cool stuff, went to like a more immersive part of it that had some documentaries showing. Uh,
Yeah.
and yeah, after like an hour, I was like, okay, let me do my work. Do my work in the quiet section of the library for maybe like 2 hours. And then out of nowhere, I hear people screaming. And I see people like getting out of their seats and running out of the library to check out the noise. So I have a hunch at this point of why they're doing that, but I don't really know for sure because I
Yeah.
was just, it's the library, and then turns out Jay-Z's there.
So
It
you
just
got to you got to see him live and in the flesh. That's so wild to me.
yeah, and yeah, it was the glimpses I got of him. They were pretty brief, but I think just something about the magic of knowing that I'm in the same vicinity as Hove, who
Yeah.
is especially in New York. I mean, it's one of the legends from not just New York, but Brooklyn specifically. And I could tell that most of the people there were Brooklyn natives too. So it meant even more to them. And they were a little bit older too. So it was a magical experience and just a testament to what happens when you live in New York. Like you can wake up and not really just think you're gonna have a normal day, and then next thing you know, JC's right there.
Yeah, it's wild. And I mean, I've always dreamed of like meeting Jay-Z at one point in real life. And to hear that you actually got to see him, that's cool. That's really rare because like think about it. He not only is he really significant to the rap game, but he's also a billionaire, you know?
He
Like
is
you got to see a
literally
billionaire in person.
yeah, and I didn't even really think about it like that, but I think that's part of the allure of how crazy it was is the fact that this person is just this very limited part of society that has a handful of members. Like this person made it to that, even though most of his life he was so far from that.
Yeah, and I mean it's interesting because whenever we're in Brooklyn, like we'll bike from Bushwick to Dumbo, and you'll pass Marcy houses on DeKalb, and it's just so weird to think about the fact that like he grew up there, right? And I believe he actually sold drugs, right? I know that there's like a lot of debate about that as to whether or not that was an actual experience that he had, but was like, a drug dealer and things like that, and then became a rapper and then became a businessman and then became this mogul.
Yeah, I don't. We had talked about that before, like that debate. I don't really understand why that's a debate. Of course, the man did.
Well, I mean, because that's we've talked about this before in terms of like rappers and putting on a persona. Rick Ross, you know, like that whole debate. We know that rappers like 50 Cent, like they actually live that lifestyle. But for some people, you actually have to you create a persona. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I think more. I think now, especially with the internet being the way that you market yourself, it's a lot easier to put on that persona versus back then when so much of your early rise to your career was your credibility amongst like the people in your neighborhood. You couldn't, it was a lot harder to fake that when the people who were seeing you on your rise knew you and could speak
Yeah.
to whether or not what you were saying was true or not. So I think it's, yeah.
And dude, the real thing is that like I was almost nervous to talk about that on the podcast because it's like it's such a controversial thing. And I think that the fact that he achieved such a level of success, regardless of like what his past was, just speaks to the uniqueness of his journey, you know?
Yeah, it really, I see that as obviously it's a combination of things, but it's you know how they talk about how grit is really what separates the people who really make it in life from the people who came from those same circumstances as the ones who really made it but didn't fully make it to that. I think it
Yeah.
really speaks to that.
Yeah, for sure. So I have two questions, and I'll start with this question. So you know how there was a big debate about whether or not you'd take was it $1 million or dinner with Jay-Z?
Yo, the age old question that I feel like I see some form of that question on social media at least once a week. I find it hilarious.
What would you take?
Definitely the $1 million.
Did you see the meme? Did you see the meme of the guy that took the dinner with Jay-Z? Jay-Z was like, wait, you did what?
Yeah, yeah. It was like an animated video.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah,
um
no, it's I understand the point that people try and make when they present that question, but ultimately, I mean, come on. What realistically, obviously that would be a crazy experience. I would love to have dinner with Jay-Z, but what is he gonna tell you that you can't search yourself or you know like
no, people think that
must you go to him for that?
yeah, but that shows that certain people develop these like godlike qualities where they have this legend that precedes them. Like, yo, maybe if I sit down for dinner with Kobe Bryant, I'll finally learn how to like, dribble. I'll become like an elite athlete or something like that just by being in proximity to him. Or
Yeah,
like, if I have a conversation with Jeff Bezos, he's gonna tell me like the secret to becoming like wealthy.
yeah,
Yeah, I think Jay's like that. I would take the $1 million, man, because
yeah.
I
I'm
have
glad
so
you
many
have
ideas.
sense.
I have so many ideas that I'm like, yo, if I could just have like $1 million to make it happen, and then it's like, dream of being at the same table with Jay Z.
Yeah, I mean, for 99.9% of people in the world, $1 million is life-changing money. So
Yeah,
whether it's because you have an idea that that $1 million would help you launch, or even if it's just to make sure that you're good for a certain amount of time and the people around you are good for a certain amount of time, why would you not? Come on.
yeah, like having calamari with Jay Z, which 40/40 club or whatever is not gonna a long term investment. I don't think.
Yeah, yeah. I saw this I think it was an excerpt from an interview on Twitter earlier today, and it was Tyler, who's as we've talked about is one of my favorite artists of all time, Tyler the Creator, and he
Yeah,
was
you said him on a first name basis, like a close friend.
no, no, that's Tyler the Creator. Kind of is a long thing to say, Tyler.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
so yeah, he was talking about how he Jay Z and Tyler's from LA, and Jay Z has some property in LA, and Jay invited Tyler to a dinner, and that eventually was, I guess, it was all part of a plan to eventually try and sign him. I think this was relatively earlier on in his career, and he said no. And then a reply to that tweet was, "Well, Tyler had his dinner with Jay Z, and look what happened." The
Yeah. Damn. That's
dinner was not
interesting.
persuasive enough.
Yeah, that's interesting. So what's like your first memory of Jay-Z?
That's a great question. he was, because he's not someone that was played in my household, because I mean we come from African upbringings. Our parents weren't really on that, but obviously they knew of him as a figure, and they knew of him as, you know, in 2008 or whenever it was
Yeah.
when he married Beyonce. So obviously that kind of brought him more into some type of conversation in my household growing up. But I think
Yeah.
my first memory with his music specifically was hearing the song "It's a Hard Knock Life,"
Mm.
which came out, that was in like 98, 97 when it came out, that era. So obviously I heard it a little bit late. I was one when it came out, so it's not
Yeah.
really like not really too much I could have done. But I think that was like my first exposure to him musically. And then obviously the song that you hear with any group of tourists in this city that we live in, featuring Alicia Keys.
Yeah.
Song When that song came out, I think in 2009, then it was like, okay, that's this guy.
Yeah.
This guy is here, and this guy means something to this city that he's making this song about. Um, and then I would say, as far as like me actually starting to listen to him like that, that was Watch the Throne, which was 2011 with, you know, the joint album with Kanye.
Interesting. Yeah, so I think the first time that I really listened to him, it was like 2005 maybe. My sister got an iPod, and I'm realizing how transformative the fact that my sister had an iPod just was on my life. Like it's impacted like how I consume music, like, you know, the app I'm working on, like all that stuff.
Yeah,
So the song that I listened to was called Never Let Me Down. It was Kanye West, J.I.V., and Jay-Z. And I just remember like Jay's verse after Kanye's like super fire. Um, but then Jay's verse, he just comes in, and I just was surprised at like his ego, his level of like confidence in himself. You know, he's like, who else you know been hot this long? Started from nothing, but he got this strong. And he's like, and then he starts saying all these things that I didn't understand. He's like, peddled rock before I met you, you know, which is essentially him being like, yo, I used to sell drugs. And
yeah.
I didn't
My
that
8-year-old kid
reference.
didn't know what that was.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And I just remember being like amazed at how like just the confidence that he had and like the storytelling. And I used to be rapping that like verse to my friends in the hallway in school when I was in like elementary school.
Yeah,
Um and then as I got older, I really started to dive into his discography. And so I remember when I was in middle school, one song that I really liked was Lost One. And that's kind of like a deep cut from his album Kingdom Come that came
yeah,
out in '06. And I thought it was amazing because he actually has this side that's really emotional, the side that talks about, you know, like things that actually happened to him in his real life, which is really at odds with like him talking about, oh, you know, I'm rich, I'm swaggy, I'm wealthy. So the song Lost One, on the last verse, he talks about how he bought his nephew a car and how his nephew died in the car that he bought him, you know, and how like he felt like he had to make all of these kind of compromises when he became extra wealthy. And so I've always really liked that very reflective side of Jay-Z. And I think that that's actually the side that we see more and more. Because if
yeah,
you look at like all these old pieces of footage, you know, like Jay used to be in a jersey and then he started wearing suits everywhere. And then all of a sudden he has dreads. And so he's also this interesting case study of like transformation as a person.
yeah. That's true. And that song that you just mentioned, I remember way back in that was our very first episode, right? When we were talking about the Billionaire Club in hip hop. I remember you
Yeah.
mentioned that song and that story. So kind of
Yeah.
forgot to mention that.
Yeah. That's an interesting one.
Yeah, and then
Um,
to your last point about his transformation in terms of his looks, um, I've also seen, back to Twitter, you know, my preferred social media platform. I've
yeah.
also seen over the years a lot of discussion about, you know, the fact that he's able to be in these spaces looking the way that he does now with the dreads, like how I saw him a week and a half ago. People are people are trying to turn that into, you know, he's redefined what success looks like from a, you know, being in those business spaces. He's redefined what success can look like, which this could be a tangent, but what's your take on that? Because I don't fully when I don't full I'm not really fully on board when I see that because
Yeah.
Jay-Z is not the average person, so it's not really
Yeah.
yeah.
I hear what you're saying. I'm on the same wavelength. It's not that he looks like that, and and in spite of that, he's able to achieve a certain level of success. It's that he achieved a certain level of success, and now he essentially has fuck you money, and he can wear whatever he wants. You know?
Facts. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I think
People
that's what that is.
yeah, I agree 100%. I thought that was good to point out because I've seen that discussion enough times.
Yeah, and I mean, it's really interesting because, like, I saw one interview that Jay Z did with Kevin Hart, and I think he's one of those people. Just like it's really exciting to see like this class of like older black men who just start to come to terms with like all of the trauma that they experienced. I think like brother Will Smith is there, like Dave Chappelle is there, and Jay Z. Like they're all in a club. Like if they got into a room to have a conversation, it'd be an interesting one. And so Jay Z was talking about with Kevin Hart how his father kind of abandoned the family, and that was really hard for him. Like he talks about that in a lot of his music. But he was saying he finally understood why, because it's like his brother, so Jay Z's father's brother, his uncle, had been killed in Brooklyn,
Mhm.
right? And the police just didn't take enough of an interest to go and arrest the person that had killed him or do an investigation. And so he was so haunted by the fact that his brother's killer was just on the loose that he like abandoned the family to go and find the killer to try to find out exactly what had happened and get revenge. And so that whole thing just really impacted him and kind of determined like a lot of the things and the ways he acted. And I think that started to show up in his music like 444 a lot later.
Mhm. Yeah, 444. Yeah, what's your I don't have all the J albums at hand because he's not really as much of a pivotal figure he is in the world. He's just not really like who I wouldn't even say he's in my top 10, which we're gonna get to later. Yeah,
Whoa.
yeah, that's could be a hot take, but that's I gotta live my truth. But I do love
Damn.
444. So I was wondering, before we get into that discussion of rankings of him compared to other artists, how would you rank the albums?
Let me look. I pulled them up. Um, and listen, it's hard. I would say Watch the Throne is like towards the bottom for me. Magna Carta, Holy Girl, towards the bottom for me. Like
Too
my
poppy?
favorite albums, huh?
Too poppy?
Yeah, they're very poppy, but I mean, I really like Reasonable Doubt. I think that that's a great album. Hard Knock Life, his earlier stuff. He has this one album under Unplugged live on MTV, but my favorite album is Kingdom Come. Not even a question.
Mhm.
Not even a question. 444 is like close. But yeah, Reasonable Doubt, Kingdom Come. There's actually an interesting story behind this album called In My Lifetime.
Yeah.
So there's you hear about the time that Jay-Z, I feel bad because I feel like I'm like low-key spilling the dude's tea. But he lives a
No,
very
bad for JC.
he lives a very public life. And so
Yeah, don't have no sympathy.
there was a point where he actually was in trouble with the law because he stabbed someone in a club. Like just and so isn't that kind of crazy to think about? Like Jay-Z the billionaire, the person who sold 14 like top, number one records, where he is now, very reflective, very spiritual, like at one point in his life, he like stabbed someone in a club. Like he was very much so about that life.
Yeah. I mean, it doesn't surprise me, but obviously just having an idea of him as a whole, it's not that surprising. But on the surface, it's, if you just saw him today and you met him and you interacted with him, you saw the way he moves. Yeah, you might not necessarily know that he was capable of that or did that at some point. So that is really
Yeah. And the reason I mention it is because it was over an album that had theoretically been leaked. So this just shows how different hip hop was as just like an industry back in the day.
mhm.
Because there was this person named Lance Rivera. I don't remember exactly which record label he worked for, but Jay-Z was getting ready to release In My Lifetime Volume 2. And for some reason, the it just leaked everybody in the streets had it. They're playing it, they're selling it out of their trunks. Like before it was supposed to release, people were blasting it. You could hear it from, I read this and like different reporting and things like that. So then he finds the dude in the club, and then he just like theoretically just like kind of assaults him. And the crazy thing is that he rapped about it later. I remember there was this one song called Dear Summer. And he essentially just like alluded to it and just was like talking about how that's how he reacts when there's conflict in the picture. So I thought that was just interesting.
No, that's wild. Also, because what year did that happen? The leak?
The leak, so this is in my lifetime, so 97.
Yeah, the year that we were born. Comparing what happens with leaks in 97 versus now, and how leaks happen, and just the reaction after the fact, I think could be interesting, because obviously it's more of a, now if something gets leaked, anyone in the world can listen to that before that artist had originally intended. But back then it was more just people in the area had access to it.
Yeah, that's interesting. But
Yeah.
so what are your top Jay-Z albums?
Um, like I was saying, I don't have as close of a relationship to him as you, is what it seems like. But I definitely, Watch the Throne will always have a place in my heart. You know, that weird eighth grade, ninth grade time of my life.
That
Um
was a weird time.
yeah, because it's like the awkwardness of middle school that spills into high school, where now you're in a different phase of life, but you're really not at the same time, because you're like 14. So the songs that were big during those weird years, I feel like have a certain significance. So I have to say Watch the Throne.
Yeah.
Like No
I
Church in the Wild.
yeah.
Obviously the song that relates to the place that you're currently in right now.
Yep, I know what you're
Yeah.
talking
Like
about.
that one specifically is, I would say that's timeless. Like I would say there's a few songs from like the early 2010s, like that era of hip hop, that I could pretty confidently say that any major, on a night out on a weekend in any major city in the US, you can go to some club and they're gonna play that song at least once.
Yeah. Apparently they played that song like 12 times on repeat when Jay-Z and Kanye West did a show in Paris together.
I heard that, yeah.
Can you imagine what that would have been like?
Yeah, I wonder what that means for them, the French people, when that happens. Like, do they see it as a shout out to us because you're doing that in our city in Paris, or is it just kind of like just a gimmick?
As someone who currently is living in Paris, I would say that they probably feel honored, because the reason that song is important is because it's essentially saying like, look at us, like we
We're
essentially like
out here
live.
in Paris.
Yes, like one of the most culturally relevant cities in the world, one of the most expensive cities in the world, and we're able to be here just like, doing whatever, acting any type of way, right?
Yeah,
But that was crazy, because that whole period in hip hop was about them just flaunting their wealth. I was listening to a podcast earlier today, and the host was saying that that's not really acceptable anymore. You can't just be like, look, I'm rich and I'm black and I'm acting, like I'm essentially enjoying certain freedoms that I would not have been able to in certain years. And that's why I think like that whole album was really interesting, because they sampled like Otis Redding. And so he's this person who was like
also a great song, Otis.
yeah, like a civil rights character in a lot of ways. And so I think that was kind of the underlying theme there, which is like black excellence that could not have existed, because those are two billionaires, Jay-Z and Kanye West. Like
Not at the time, but now for sure. Well, one of them is now.
we don't even know. We don't even know if
We
the
don't
other one
fully
is
know,
black,
but like,
because I saw on LinkedIn that apparently Adidas is selling Yeezys again.
uh, mm,
So
that's for another episode.
that's a whole episode in itself.
Yeah. Um, but yeah, so So yeah, like I was back to that hot take that I had earlier. At least I'm assuming that you took it as a controversial thing, but yeah, he's just not really in my top 10. But it sounds like he's in yours. So
That
where would
that's
you say he
very
lies?
controversial. That's extremely controversial. He has the number. He's the number one selling rapper ever.
Yeah, but it's and again, let me refer back to Tyler the Creator, my number one artist ever. He did an interview on it wasn't Drink Champs, but it was one of those types of platforms where I think it was Rap Radar, um, where he was talking to some people and he was talking about the weird obsession with, especially when it comes to these blog pages, when it comes to, oh, your top 10 doesn't have this person, doesn't have this person, but they're a legend. And Tyler's point was like, dude, I was 1 year old when this person was in their peak. Like, just because I can acknowledge that they're a legend and obviously the impact that they've had in this space is incredibly influential, doesn't mean that I necessarily have to see them that way or have to have them ranked in this within that list, because that's just not who I put on my in my day-to-day life. So that's
Fair.
he said that, and he's getting that interview. It was one of those things where an interview comes out like a month ago, but then someone clips that one part of it, and then now people are acting like he just said something crazy. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, that's kind of how I look at it. Like, love everything he's done, but do I listen to him on a normal basis? Not really.
Yeah. Okay. I hear that. You've revealed something new to me.
Yeah.
So honestly, I see like rapper lists as I see basketball players, right? Like this is gonna be an analogy, so stick with me.
Yeah, I'm here.
I don't necessarily think that there's any reason to like rank them. Like I have a collective group of 10 rappers that I think are really great that are like collectively they're my favorite 10 rappers. I'm not going to like rank them or anything. But I think it's kind of like you're putting together the best basketball team, Shaq, Kobe, Michael, none of them are being ranked, but it's like those are like the really powerful group together.
Mhm.
Um I kind of decide who my top rappers are based on who I'd want to spend time with, who I'd want to like sit down and like learn from, and who I think has just
Have dinner
contributed.
with.
Yeah, like bro, think about it. Tupac was our age when he died, 25.
Yeah,
You
I was thinking about that actually the other day. Um, I forget what prompted that thought, but I literally was thinking about the fact that I'm 25. And when I was 24, which was how old Biggie was when he died, I also had that same line of thinking.
Which is wild. And the thing that probably made you think of it was the fact that I sent you the article of they did a search in a house in LA to see who the killer was.
Yes,
Of
yeah, yeah, yeah. And we talked about that a little bit.
Yeah, and that's gonna be a whole new episode too. But yeah, so like that's how I choose my top 10. And Jay-Z is definitely in there, but also, terms of like top selling rap albums, it's Jay-Z at 14, I believe, right below the Beatles, which is crazy. Like not even just rap albums, like number one albums sold ever.
Just in
Most
life.
albums. Yeah, like the Beatles, right under the Beatles, and then it goes like Taylor Swift and Drake, who are tied, right? And then it goes like Kanye West with 10. So Jay-Z has 14, Drake has 12, and Kanye West has 10. And that's interesting to me because it's a lot like the debate in basketball. Who's the best player ever? Kobe, LeBron, Jordan.
Mhm,
I think that like those three rappers, Kanye, Drake, and Jay-Z, are very similar they have a very similar dynamic.
mhm. Yeah, and that I actually didn't know. I mean, you would kind of mention that earlier, his how many albums he sold in his life, but I didn't really know that till recently. And that actually makes sense, especially when I think about the fact that back in 2008, and this was something that the Book of Hov exhibition really harped on. Back in 2008, he was called to headline Glastonbury, which is, for those who don't know, that's one of the biggest music festivals in the world. Takes place in the UK every year, and it's very much a representation of who's big at the moment, but also like who has been big for a long time. Because this is to be at that stage, at that level, like that's really considered an honor. So to
Yeah.
headline is even crazier. And the fact that you're saying Jay Z is in the same conversation with the Beatles when it comes to album sales, and the Beatles are from the UK, really makes sense given the fact that there was so much controversy when Jay-Z was announced as the headliner for Glastonbury, because
Yeah.
people at the time, it's a lot different now, but at the time, hip hop, just American hip hop, was probably enjoyed within certain communities in London, and among people who were just like music heads who were into that, but wider British society didn't really, they just weren't really on it like that. So it was a crazy occasion for a hip hop artist, much less Jay-Z, to be the headliner.
Yeah. And I mean, I think that that in itself is a huge question of like how much of a global superpower rap is.
Mm-hmm.
Like because looking at that list of top albums, like a lot of those albums are rap albums. There's a debate: is Drake a rapper, right? Is Drake even a rapper? Is he more of a pop star? But at the end of the day, we
Which
see
I
like
disagree. I disagree with that.
that we can discuss that later. But that I think it just shows how powerful rap is as a global force. The fact that like someone was able to become a billionaire, the fact that they were able to, almost sell more number one albums than the Beatles. Um, and I think that that whole exhibition at the Central Library in Brooklyn just kind of captured all of that and put it in a nice, very navigatable space.
Bro, it was such a crazy experience. It's when you get back, I think it will still be going for another week. So definitely down to check it out with you again. Although I don't know if he's gonna be there again. I think that was just because I went on the first day.
Yeah, man. Hopefully we get invited to the Rock Nation brunch at one point when the podcast takes off and the music stuff. We
Oh
got to
man,
do an episode about like the music business because we got a lot going on, man.
we
We got
do
a lot going on,
a
and that's
lot
the
going
thing.
on and a lot to talk about.
A lot going on, a lot to talk about, and I think that that's one of the things that inspires me about Jay is because like if he can make 1 billion and put get a jersey up in the rafter for some of the things he's done, then we can do that too.
Mm-hmm.
So
Just so many different avenues in life too. I think it just goes to show that whatever career you start out with, life is. You always tell me life is not linear, so that's he's a perfect example of that. Just in terms of how many different facets of life he's been able to dip his toe into.
yeah, man. So all right, I think that does it for today, right?
Yes, sir. There's with a figure like that, you could we could dissect his life for hours, but I think we've touched on what he means to us, and yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So stay tuned, y'all. Keep listening to the podcast. We got a lot of other episodes. This is an interim episode before we really kick off season two, but we got a lot of stuff we want to show you guys. So thank you for listening.
Yes, sir.